Animation is the process of transitioning an object between two distinct states. Let's label them as A and B. When moving an object from state A to state B, it does look like the object is changing its position, but with a sudden jump. To achieve a smooth transition instead, we need to add the intermediary states referred to as in-betweens. Adding in-betweens like this between two states is called interpolation. Now the states can be anything, that is the object's position, size, color, or even the shape itself. We can interpolate between any two states like this. In Rive, we can key in the states and the values will be interpolated in between. Upon closer examination of the motion generated through the interpolation, you will notice that the object maintains a constant speed from the start to the finish. And naturally, nothing moves like that except robots. When a motion starts, it gradually picks up speed and comes to a stop slowly as well. That is acceleration and deceleration. To replicate this organic behavior, we can manipulate the interpolation curve. By default, the curve follows a linear path, resulting in linear interpolation. Instead, we can introduce a curve to the initial segment of the animation. This adds a gradual start, imitating a slow acceleration. The impact of the interpolation curve on the motion is notable. Adjusting the curve causes the animation's movement to start slowly, distinguishing it from the prior abrupt start. This practice, referred to as easing, enables us to add realism to animations. We can go ahead and apply easing to the end of the animation as well for the deceleration. Now the object starts slowly, stays steady in the middle, and stops slowly at the end. In Rive, we can define the same from the interpolation panel. So that's the basics of animation. Let's go ahead and start with the same in Rive. This video provides a glimpse into the full Rive course. If you find it useful, consider enrolling in the Rive Masterclass to enhance your interactive animation skills with Rive. Use code SWITCH50 for a 50% discount. Act fast as redemptions are limited. With that said, let's return to the video. In this lesson, we will overview the animation interface, and to switch over to the animation mode, from the design mode, you can select the animation tab over here, or you can press the keyboard shortcut, that is tab on your keyboard, to switch between the design and the animate mode. It is a very helpful shortcut which can be used to switch back and forth between the design and the animate mode. Now you can see at the bottom we have our animation interface. So let's go ahead and overview the same. We have the animations panel where all the animations and state machines are listed out. For now, we will focus on the animations, and you can see by default we have a state machine and a timeline added to our file. These are added by default when we create a new Rive file. And if you want to add any more animation or a state machine, you can do that by clicking on the plus icon and selecting the one which you want to add. Timeline is for an animation and state machine is for state machine. By default, we have this timeline one added, and if we want to rename it, we can go ahead and double click the same and enter our name, that is animation, like this. Now when we have selected a animation or a timeline, we get to see its timeline and its options. You can see we have a play and pause button which can be used to play or pause the animation. You can also use the keyboard shortcut, that is the space bar, to perform the same. Then we have the options to set the animation mode, that is by default it is set to one shot, that is the animation will play for only once, that is one shot. But if you want it to repeat, then you can set the other animation modes. We'll learn more about them in the future lesson. And I can also enable and disable the work area from here as well. Then we have the playhead and the keyframe options, that is we can switch between the next and the previous key. We will use the same when we have keyframes to work with. Then we have the Show Selected Layers toggle, which can be used to filter out the layers in the timeline and only show the layers which are selected. This is a helpful feature which can be used to filter out unnecessary layers and show only the ones which we want. Then we have the toggle for the graph editor, that is this right here. If I click on the same, then we have the graph editor. The graph editor can be used to change the interpolation of our keyframes using handles. Let's go ahead and disable the same. Lastly, we have the options for our animations. That is, we have the current position that is at 1 second right now. If I go ahead and change the same, you can see the playhead moves. We can set the total duration of the animation, which is by default 1 second. You can go ahead and change the same. That is, we have the number of frames, then we have the number of seconds, and then we have the number of minutes. The number of frames depends on the FPS you have set. That is, if I go ahead and set the frame rate to 30, then it will be half a second. And if I set 00, then it will be a full second. If you want, you can set a lower number as well, but 60 FPS is just fine. You can also set the playback speed of the animation. That is, by default it is 1, that is the normal speed. But if I set a number like 0.5, then it will be half of the speed, that is slower. And if I set 2, then it will be double the speed, that is faster. You can set the animation speed like this to test different timings. Next we have the timeline, that is spanning over the duration of our animation. Here we have specified 1 seconds, that's why we have the timeline spanning from 0 seconds to 1 seconds. If we want to scrub through the timeline, we can just use this playhead and drag it like this. If you want to set the zoom level of the timeline, then you can use this rubber band and select either end of this and drag it like this to zoom in our timeline. If you want to pan around, you can just select this and drag it like this. And the same shortcuts which we used on the stage to pan can be used on the timeline as well. That is, I can go ahead and hold Shift and drag like this to pan our timeline, or I can use the middle mouse button as well to move like this. Lastly, we have the Interpolation tab where we can select keyframes and set the interpolation. So that's the animation interface. In the next lesson, let's go ahead and create an animation. In this lesson, we will learn how to create an animation. And for the same, we will animate this ellipse from the top to the bottom like this. Nothing fancy, but a very good way to get started. Let's switch over to the animate mode. And here what I want is that at the start of the animation, that is the 0 frame, we want this ellipse to be at the top. And then let's say at 38th frame, that is halfway through our animation, we want this ellipse to be at the bottom. And to do the same, we have to key its position in the mentioned frames. Now there are several ways to create keyframes. That is, we can go ahead and select the object we want, then move our playhead at the position where the keyframe should be created, and then over to the inspector panel, we can go ahead and select any property we want to animate. Here you will notice that every property in the inspector panel has a diamond beside the same. And if I switch over from the design and back to the animate, notice how the diamonds appear in the animate mode. I can go ahead and select any property, let's say the Y value of our ellipse, that is its position. And if I click on the diamond beside the same, we create a keyframe of its Y position at 0 frame. And you can see in the timeline we have a same diamond as well. This is called a keyframe. And if I go ahead and expand the ellipse, you can see we have its position of Y to 50 keyed at 0 frame. That's how we create keyframes. Now I can go ahead and just enter the number we want, that is the top position. You can see the same is keyed in. And now I can go ahead and move the playhead to the other position, that is 30th frame. And now I can visually move the object, that is I can place it at the bottom like this, and the bottom keyframe is created automatically, that is Y position of 450. So that's how you create an keyframe, and our animation is ready. I can go ahead and play the animation like this, and you can see our ellipse goes from the top to the bottom. Nothing interesting, but we have created our very first animation. And using these keyframes, you can animate any property. You can animate the scale, the rotation, the size, the opacity, the color, and so on. If any property has this diamond beside the same, you can animate the same. Now, one thing to note here is that the positioning or the distance between the keyframes. That is here, if I go ahead and move this keyframe farther away from the other and play the animation, notice how smooth and slow the animation is. And if I move this closer to the other animation and play the animation, notice how fast it is. So, depending on the space or the distance between two keyframes, the speed is affected. The closer the keyframes are, the faster the animation is, and the further away the keyframes are, the slower the animation is. So that's how we can create a basic animation with Rive. But as mentioned before, this is nothing close to interesting. It looks very mechanical and feels unnatural. In the next lesson, let's go ahead and learn about how to add easing and curves to the animations and make it feel more natural. In the previous lesson, we learned how can we keyframe different properties and animate the same. In this case, we are animating the Y position of the ellipse from the top to the bottom like this. And you can notice that the motion happens at a constant speed. That is, it looks mechanical and does not look real. Now we have discussed this before, that is, if you want to add realism to your motions, then you need to add easing to the same. To add easing to our motion in Rive, we can go ahead and select the keyframe, go to the interpolation panel, and here we can apply the easing. Now you can see we have some values, and by default, linear is selected. That is, we are linearly interpolating between the two values, that is the top and the bottom here. Now if we want to add easing, then we can select the cubic as our interpolation, and you can see instead of a straight line, we have curves. We are easing in the animation and easing it out as well. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, notice the difference. We are starting slowly, picking up speed, and ending slowly again. By just adding cubic to any animation, we can make it look more real. Now you can go ahead and edit the handles of the interpolation, that is the curve right here, to get different effects. That is, I can go ahead and drag this to the very right like this, and this one as well. Now you can see we have a different effect, that is, we start very slowly, pick up speed in the middle, which is very fast, and then again end very slowly as well. So that's how you can change the curves to get different effects. Now you would have noticed we have some values beneath the curve, that is this right here, which can be used to influence the curve as well. That is, the first two values are of the lower handle, that is the easing in, and the last two values are affecting the upper handle, that is our ease out. If I go ahead and set the starting curve to 0, 0 like this, you can see it moves to the start, and we have taken out easing from the in. So if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see it starts at a constant speed, and then it goes ahead and slows down because we have the ease out in place. I can go ahead and paste in a custom cubic value if you have, and I can paste one right here, that is this right here. And if I play the animation, you can see we have an effect like this, that is start very fast and then settle into the position slowly like this. So that's how you can change the interpolation of different keyframes to get desired effect. Now one thing to note here is that we have two other values as well, that is the first one is a hold value. So if I go ahead and select the same, and now if I go ahead and play the animation, no animation happens at all, because if you take a look at the graph, you can see instead of a straight line, we have a line which is running from the bottom, so we don't have any interpolation happening, and at the end we are just switching to the other value, that is the bottom here. So if you want to hold some value during animation, you can use the hold keyframe. Now the other value is the graph editor, that is the curve with handles. Using this, we can edit the curves of our animation or the interpolation in the graph editor. So let's go ahead and enable the graph editor by clicking on this. And if I select the ellipse, you can see we have a graph and paths between the top and the bottom position like this. I can go ahead and edit these handles to influence the motion like this. Now the better way to use the graph is when you have multiple key values. I can go ahead and add a point in between. By hovering over the line, you can see we have a point. If I click here, you can see a new key is added to our animation, and if I move it around, it will influence our animation. So if I go ahead and play the same, notice the difference. Now let's say we want to create a bounce effect, which can be easily achieved with our graph editor. So I can go ahead and select this, pull it close to the ending keyframe, and then make sure it is roughly in a straight line with this one right here. And then I'll go ahead and drag this down like this, and I will drag this down as well. And I will get the other side of the handle very short like this, and then drag this down to create a curve like this, that is go up, go down, and then come into the resting position. So if I go ahead and play the animation now, watch what happens. So we have an effect where the bounce happens, and right now it was too harsh. I can go ahead and adjust the curve again. You can see it drops into the position, bounces back, and then rests into its position like this. So you can go ahead and create effects like this as well. And here you will notice that the ball or our ellipse drops very slowly. So I can go ahead and bring this keyframe close to the other like this. And then at the ending, the bounce happens very quickly. So we can go ahead and add more spacing in between like this. And now if I play the animation, you can see we have a bounce effect. So that's how you change the interpolation between keyframes in Rive. Over the past few lessons, we have created this animation, that is animating the ellipse from the top to the bottom with an easing applied, that is right here. Now let's say what we want to do is animate this ellipse like a bouncing ball, that is it will go down and go back up, again go down, and keep repeating the motion. To do that, we need to change the animation mode of our animation. Right now it is set to one shot, that is it will play once and call it a day. So we'll go ahead and change it to the looping mode. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see it goes ahead and goes to the bottom, and when it reaches the end of our animation, it starts back from the start of our animation. Now there's a problem, that is when it reaches the bottom, it jumps back to the top without any animation. Now it looks a bit weird because we want the ball to animate up and down smoothly. To do that, let's go ahead and change the animation. That is, to create a looping animation like this, the starting frame and the ending frame should look similar. Now let's go ahead and do the same. That is, we'll go ahead and animate down at the 30th frame, and then we'll animate back up at the end of our animation so that the looping effect works. Let's go ahead and take the value, that is 50. So I'll go ahead and insert the same here, and we have created the keyframe for the upper animation. Let's add easing to this keyframe as well. And now if we play the animation, you can see we are animating up and down smoothly as we intended. Now it does look like the ellipse is moving back and forth, but it does not looking like the ellipse or the ball is bouncing. To add a bouncing effect, we need to change the curves. So let's go ahead and do the same. That is, when we fall to the ground, we should not ease. That is, we'll go ahead and fall to the ground without any weight. That is, it should hit the ground without any easing applied. To do that, we'll take away the ease out portion from this interpolation. So I can go ahead and drag this handle to the start like this. And to be precise, I can set the numbers of the last two values to be 1 and 1 like this. And then I will take out the ease in portion. That is, when the ball hits the ground without any easing, it should bounce back up without any easing as well. That is, I will select this and take out the easing from here as well. And to be precise, let's set this to 0, 0 like this, so that the ease in is taken out from our interpolation. Now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we get a more real like bounce effect. Now to understand the same better, let's use the graph editor. That is, I'll go ahead and open the graph editor, select our ellipse, and you can see what happens is that we go ahead and start slowly, hit the ground without any weighting, and jump back up as well without any weighting. That's what happens when an object hits the ground and again bounces back up. And when we bounce up, we wait for a while. That is, we go ahead and wait for a while before dropping, bounce up, and then wait a bit as well. That is easing applied when the ball is at the top. So that's how we can achieve a bouncing ball effect like this. In this lesson, we will learn about some keyboard shortcuts which can be used to navigate our timeline. Now we already know that we can click and drag the playhead to scrub through our animation like this, but we can move the same with keyboard shortcuts as well. To move it in the right direction, you can press the period key like this, or the key which has the angle bracket pointing in the right direction to move the playhead frame by frame in the right direction. And if you want to move in the left direction, then you can press the comma key or the key with the angle bracket pointing in the left direction. Now instead of 1 by 1, if you want to move 10 frames ahead, that is in either direction, you can hold down Shift and then press the key of the direction, that is either in the left or in the right like this. This helps you easily navigate the timeline by moving your playhead without touching your mouse like this. Lastly, if you want to jump to the start or the end of your timeline, you can hold down Controller command, Shift, and the direction. That is, if you press the right angle bracket, then you move to the end, and if you press the left direction bracket, then you move to the start of the animation. You can use these shortcuts to easily move your playhead around in your timeline. Now let's say what we want to do is add a squash effect to our ellipse. That is, when it hits the ground, it should squash a little like this. That was a bit much, but something like this. Let's say it is a ball of rubber, so when it hits the ground, it squashes a bit. Now we will learn more about squash and stretch later in the good to great animations, but for now let's say we want to add a little squash effect to our animation to make it a bit more polished. To do that, I will go ahead And first of all, jump to the start, that is this key right here. And I can use the keyboard shortcut, that is Control, Shift, and to the left, that is at the start. I can go ahead and key in the Y scale value, that is in the vertical direction. And now if I want to go to this place right here, I can press Shift and the right direction key. But there's a shortcut for jumping between keyframes as well. That is, hold down Control or Command on the keyboard and then press the angle bracket, that is the direction in which you want to go. In this case, we want to go to this position, so I can press Control and left like this. So I'm in the middle of the animation. So I'm in the place where the ball hits the ground, and I can go ahead and scale the Y down to something like, let's say 90, or let's say 75, like this. Now we need to go to the end, and I can use the keyboard shortcut, that is Control Command, and go to the right like this. And we will set back the scale to 100 like this. So our squash effect is complete. And if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we do get a squash effect, but it is a bit weird because the ball squashes until it goes to the bottom, and again it forms back its shape until it reaches the top, which looks a bit weird. In this case, what we need to do is get these keys spacing fixed. That is, this key should be less further away from the middle key, that is closer to the same. To do that, I can drag this key and place it here like this, and there is a keyboard shortcut to move keyframes as well. So let's go ahead and perform the same on this keyframe right here. So let's say I want to move this keyframe in the left direction. To do that, I can hold down Alt or Option and press the direction key, in this case the left, and you can see the keyframe moves in the left direction. If I want to move it in the right direction, I can again hold down Alt or Option and press the right direction key. So let's move it in the right direction. Now if you don't want to move it frame by frame, that is one by one, if you want to jump to 10 frames, then you can just hold down Shift when moving the same. That is, hold Alt or Option, Shift, and the left direction, and you can see we jumped to the 10th frame ahead, that is in the left direction. Now I can go ahead and play the animation, and we get the desired effect. Now the last keyboard shortcut which we'll discuss in this lesson is the scale shortcut. That is, let's say instead of 1 second, we want this animation to complete a bounce in half a second. We can of course go to the duration or the playback speed and set it to 2x, that is 2 times the speed. But if we want to do that with the keyframes, then we can select all the keyframes in question, hold down Alt or Option, and you can see the pivot points, that is this keyframe and this keyframes becomes the anchor. And if I select this, then we can scale these keyframes with this as our origin. And you can see now all the keyframes are fitted into half a second. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see that the ball bounces down and up in half a second, but there's a delay until it reaches the ground again. To fix the same, of course, we can go ahead and change the duration to 30 frames. But this is a good case of a work area. That is, I can go ahead and in the animation mode, we can toggle in the work area. If I go ahead and select that, you can see we have 2 handles in our timeline, that is these right here. I can go ahead and move this around to define the work area or the animation of this timeline. So now this animation has 1 minute's length, but the effective animation is between the 0 frame and the 30th frame. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we are only looping in between the work area. And if I go ahead and disable the work area, we will again use the whole length of the duration. So you can use the work area to restrict your area to a subset of the whole duration. So that's it for the keyboard shortcuts and tips for animating in Rive. Trim paths can be used to animate a stroke along a path like this. In this section, we will learn how to perform the same. Now let's say we want to enable trim paths on a shape like this, that is this ellipse, which has a stroke applied. To do that, we can open the stroke properties, and here you can see we have the trim path option. By default, it is set to none, that is trim paths is disabled, and to enable the same, we can select either of the sequential or the synced option. Let's select the sequential option, and when I do that, notice the border or our stroke disappears from the shape. That's because the start and the end right now is set to 0%. And to get back the stroke on our shape, we can increase the number of the end, that is like this. The stroke appears for the percent of the end. So our stroke is starting right here and ending here. Now if I go ahead and enter a number like 25%, then we are filling quarter of the circle, in this case 25% of the same. Using this property, we can animate the trim path. Now one thing to note here is that we are starting from this position, that is the top center, and then our stroke is flowing in the right direction. That's because of the winding direction of our path. And if I want to change that, that is instead of in the right direction, I want to start in the left direction. To do that, I can select the shape, go inside the vertices editor mode, and here you can notice that the starting point is pointing in the right direction. And to change the same, I can click on reverse direction, and you can see now we are pointing towards the left direction and the stroke is starting in the same direction. So that's how you can change the direction of the stroke's starting point if you'd like. Let's go back to the trim path properties, that is in the stroke properties. We have the offset as well, which can be used to influence the offset of the starting point. That is, let's say instead of starting here, I want to start from here, that is the center right. I can go ahead and change the offset like this, and you can see that the start moves from the top center to the center right like this. So that's how you can change different properties of trim path to create animations like this. Now when we enable trim paths on the shape, we have set the trim path to sequential, and we have another option as well, that is synced. To notice the difference between the same, we need two or more paths inside a shape layer. Let's go ahead and set the trim path to none right now, and then I will select the ellipse path and duplicate the same. Now we'll go ahead and scale it a bit down so that we create two concentric circles like this. Right now both of the circles are stroked, and if I go ahead and enable the trim path by choosing the sequential option and moving the end value, notice the effect. That is, first of all we fill the inner circle and then we fill the outer circle. So we are filling the paths sequentially, that is one after the other. And if I change the trim path from sequential to synced, then we will affect the trim path of both of these strokes at once like this. So that's how you enable trim path in Rive. In the previous lesson, we learned how to add trim paths to a stroke like this. And in this lesson, we will create a basic spinner animation. For the same, we will animate the start, end, and the offset, that is the trim path properties. And for the animation itself, we'll go ahead and animate the end to, let's say, 25% like this. Then we will animate the start to make a follow-through effect like this. Again, we will go ahead and animate the end to something like this, and then follow through with the starting point like this. Let's go ahead and perform the same in our animation timeline. In animation mode, if I go ahead and open the trim path properties, you will notice we have diamonds beside the same. That is, we can animate and key in these properties. Let's go ahead and create keyframes for each property. And now I can go ahead and expand the ellipse and change these properties from the timeline. Let's go ahead and animate the endpoint first. So I will move the playhead a bit further, let's say 20 frames ahead, and set the trim end to, let's say, 25% like this. We have created another keyframe here, and now if I move the playhead, you can see we have animation from 0 to 25% like this. Great. Now we'll go ahead and animate the starting point, that is from 0%, so I can drag this keyframe right here, and then I will move the same amount as the trim end, that is 20 frames ahead, like this. And now I will go ahead and set it to 25% as well. And if I scrub through the animation, you can see we go ahead and follow back with the starting point like this. And if I play the animation as a whole, you can see we get the effect, but the animation is happening too fast. So let's enter a hold or some delay between these two animations. So I'll go ahead and shift this animation to the end like this. And now if I play the animation, you can see we animate the endpoint, hold for a bit, and then animate the starting point. Great. Now for the final effect, we'll go ahead and animate the offset. And before we do that, let's go ahead and overview it for a second. That is, if I select the ellipse, change the end, and now if I animate the offset, you can see the whole trim path is moving. And if the offset is set to 100%, we come back to the original state. So if you set the offset to 100%, then you can create a looping effect like this. That is, the animation will play through, and at the end, it will come back to its original position. And we'll use the same principle when we animate it in our timeline. So let's move on to the timeline. And now at the end of our animation, I'll go ahead and set the trim offset to 100% like this. And now if I play the animation, you can see we get an effect like this. But there's a slight glitch at the end, because what happens is that we go ahead and animate the end, and then we go ahead and follow through with the start. That's why our starting points comes at the center right. So we can go ahead and move our offset 25% behind. That is, instead of 100, we can dial in 75% and create a smooth looping effect. So if I go ahead and play the animation now, you can see we get a smooth animation. And we can obviously select these keyframes and apply the easing effect like this. And now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we have created the spinner animation using trim paths. So that's how we can use trim paths to create animations in Rive. Here's a challenge for you. You have to create an animation like this using trim paths. You will find the starter file in the resources with this path. So go ahead and start animating the same. You can come back to this lesson for the solution. In the starter file, you will find a path like this, which has two strokes applied, that is the background and the foreground. We have to animate the white stroke, which has trim path enabled, and you can see the start is 0 and the end is 1%. Now to achieve the animation shown in the video previously, we'll go ahead and animate the end like this. That is, first of all, animate the end and follow through with our start. And we'll set the start to 99% so that there's a gap between the same, that is of 1%, and so that we get to see the white stroke like this. So let's go ahead and perform the same in the animate mode. Let's switch over to the animate mode and fit the artboard to the stage as well. Let's open the trim path options of the white stroke, which is currently invisible, and I will go ahead and key in the start and the end and work with the same in the timeline after expanding the custom shape. So the trim end will be 1% at the very start so that we can see this portion, and then we'll go ahead and move 20 frames ahead and then animate the trim end to 100% like this. Now we'll go ahead and play through the same. You can see we go from 0 to 100% like this. Now we'll go ahead and animate the trim start. That is, I'll select this and move this to the 20th frame. And then I will move 20 frames ahead as well and set the trim start to 99% like this. That is maintaining the 1% gap in between the start and the end. Now if I go ahead and scrub through the animation, you can see we animate the end and follow through with our start like this. Now here we can achieve a different effect by shifting these keys, that is of the start to the left by 10 frames like this. And if I animate, that is play the animation, notice we have an effect like this. Now what we need to do is go ahead and come back as well. And for this, we can use the ping pong animation mode. That is, instead of copying these keys and pasting it ahead and managing the time, we can just set the mode from loop to ping pong like this, which is a very good use case of the same. And if I go ahead and play the animation, notice we go ahead and go to the start and to the end like this. Now, of course, there needs to be some delay in between the start. So let's go ahead and pause the animation, and I will select these keys and shift them 10 frames to the right like this, so that we have 10 frames gap in the start and 10 frames in the end as well. And if I do a small math, then we will have 15 frames in both ends. So let's go ahead and shift these keys 5 frames in the right again like this. Now we have equal gap in the start portion of the animation and end of the animation. Now if I go ahead and play the animation, we have the effect we wanted. Lastly, we can go ahead and select the keys and apply easing to the same, and we have finished the animation. In this lesson, we will learn how transform properties affect our strokes, and we'll learn to create an animation like this as well. We'll create the icon from scratch and then work on the animation. So let's go ahead and start creating the same. We'll go ahead and create this icon. So let's start with a circle, because it is always a good idea to start with procedural shapes when creating custom shapes. I'll go ahead and place it in the center. Now I can go ahead and inside of this circle, I will create another path, which is an ellipse, so that we have the cutout. So I'll go ahead and copy this path and paste it inside. Now we'll go ahead and scale it down or set its size to a small number like this. And if I select the path, you can see it is right there. And to punch a hole through the same, we can go ahead and set the fill rule to even odd like this. Great. So we have created an inner circle inside of the outer circle. And now we can go ahead and edit its vertices to create a sharp point here. That is like a pin. So I will hit enter, and now we're inside of the vertices edit mode. I will go ahead and drag this point down, and then I will change its type to a straight point like this. And then I will change these to asymmetric and the upper point to mirrored. And then I will go ahead and drag these handles down a bit like this. And then I can go ahead and add a bit of corner radius to the bottom point. And I can adjust these handles a bit as well, so that we have a bit of a sharpness in the bottom portion, and we are done. So our pin is ready. I can go ahead and add a small circle or an ellipse at the bottom. Let's say this right here. And our icon is ready. Let's go ahead and add colors and strokes to the same. That is, the fill of both of these shapes will be this color right here. I will add a stroke as well, which will be black, and let's say 10 pixels width. So our icon is ready and we have applied the strokes and the fills as well. Now let's work on the animation. We'll go ahead and move this pin in the Y axis, that is up and down, and then scale it in the X axis to give it a rotation effect. Now one thing you will notice here is that if we scale it to something like, let's say 40% in the X axis, then the strokes get scaled or affected as well. And you can notice the difference here, that is the circle here has the same stroke as this one, but this stroke is transformed. To maintain the stroke width, even if the transform of the shape is changed, we can go ahead and inside of the stroke properties, disable transform effects like this. And now you can see that we maintain the stroke width whatever the transform or scale of the shape is. And I can go ahead and create an animation like this. Let's go ahead and perform the same in the animate mode. So let's switch over to the animation mode, scale the artboard, and now we can go ahead and key in its position. Let's go ahead and key in the scale of this pin, that is the X scale value, and then I'll go ahead and move the playhead to something like 50th frame and set the scale to minus 100% like this. So we achieve an effect like this rotation. And now I can go ahead and move it in the Y position as well. That is, let's say, key in the Y position, go in the center of the animation, move it a bit up like this, and then I can go ahead and get it back. That is, copy this scale right here and paste it in. Now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we have the animation ready. The only thing we need to do is apply easing to the keyframes. And now if we play the animation, you can see we have the desired effect. That is, if we want, we can transform the strokes or disable the same if we intend to maintain the width of the border, that is our stroke. That's how we enable or disable transform effects on strokes to achieve different effects in Rive. In this section, we'll create animations by animating the vertices of a path. And in this lesson, we will learn how to do the same. We'll go ahead and give our icon a smile by animating the vertices of this path right here. And if I go ahead and inspect the same, you will notice it has two paths like this, which are mirrored handles. And I can go ahead and make this animate from this state to a smile state like this. Let's go ahead and perform the same. So I'll go ahead and switch over to the animate mode. And now if I open the vertice editor, notice that all the properties of a vertice have a diamond beside the same, which means we can keyframe these properties and animate between them. So let's go ahead and keyframe the position of both of these vertices along with their handles, angle, and length. Now I can go ahead and move 20 frames ahead in the timeline and change the handle to create a keyframe and change the state. I can go ahead and drag these points a bit up as well, and we have our smile. And if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we have successfully added a smile to our icon. And of course, we can go ahead and select the keyframes, add easing, and we have easing applied to our animation like this. The point is, you can animate any property of a vertice, whether its position, its angle, or its length. And if the handle type is different, that is for detached, we have more properties to animate, and for asymmetric, we have other properties to animate. So depending on the handle type, we have more or less properties to animate of a vertice. That's how we can animate vertices in Rive. In this lesson, we'll create an envelope or email closing animation like this. We'll go ahead and design it from scratch and then animate the same. Let's go ahead and start with a rectangle, which will be our email body. I will give it custom size like this, and then change its fill to white and give it a black stroke. Let's make it 6 pixels wide. And I'll also give it some corner smoothing by changing the corner value to, let's say, 8 like this. So our email body is ready. We can go ahead and add the opening portion, that is the above triangle. And before I do that, I will create a copy of the same because we will need it later. So let's enter the vertice editing mode, add a point in the middle of the top line, and then I will change its mode to a straight point and drag it up. So we have the email opened portion, and I can add some corner smoothing to it as well. Let's say 12, a bit more than the others, and our shape is ready. Now we can animate the same by taking this down like this, but you will notice that we take away the upper portion as well. That's why I have created a copy of the rectangle, and if we keep it in the background like this, we will not miss anything. That is, I can animate it from top to the bottom without any issues. Let's go ahead and animate the same. So let's switch over to the animate mode, and now I can go ahead and key in the position of the top vertice, and in this case we only need the Y value, and now I can go ahead and take it down, let's say somewhere here. I will give it some easing, so select the keyframe, apply some easing, and I will change the handles a bit as well to get a custom effect. Our animation is ready. Let's go ahead and preview the same. You can see we get a animation of the email closing like this. That's how we can animate vertices in Rive. In this lesson, we will learn how to animate between two icons, that is transitioning states like this. Let's get started with the same. Here I have the menu icon which we will animate, and then we have the arrow icon which we have to animate into. Now we'll use the menu icon's vertices to create the animation. That is, I can go ahead and change the vertices like this to create the arrow from the menu like this. So let's go ahead and perform the same. And before we do that, in the animate mode, what I can do is turn on the arrow like this, set its opacity a bit down, let's say to 25% like this, and lock the layer to use the arrow as our guide and deform our menu. So let's jump to the animate mode, and now we can go ahead and work with the animation. So I'll go ahead and key in the position of each vertice. So I'll go ahead and select them and key in the X and Y like this. Now go ahead and move 20 frames, or let's say 30 frames ahead in the timeline, and start with each path. So let's go ahead and edit this. So this point will be here and this will be here. So we are transitioning between states like this, and similarly I will edit the other path. So this will expand like this, and finally we will edit this path to complete our arrow like this. Great, we have created the transition from the menu to an arrow like this, and now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see we are animating from a menu to an arrow like this. We can of course go ahead and hide the arrow now and add some easing to the animation, and let's make it a bit drastic like this. And now if I play the animation, you can see we switch to a arrow from a menu like this, and you can see I have set the animation mode to ping pong so that we can see the animation back and forth like this. Now we can add another dimension to this animation by adding rotation to the menu. That is, I can go ahead and instead of taking the arrow in this direction, that is pointing to the left, I can make it point to the right and then rotate the whole arrow. Let's go ahead and perform the same. So I will go ahead and first of all rotate our guide. So I will select it, and to flip anything horizontally in Rive, you can go ahead and set the X scale value to minus 100% like this. You can see the arrow is rotated and now it's pointing in the right direction. And we'll use this for our guidance. And now I can go ahead and edit these path again. This will be here. And then this is fine. And for this, we will make it point to the right direction as well. Alright, now that we are pointing to the right direction, we can go ahead and make it point to the left direction by rotating the menu shape layer. I will go ahead and again hide the arrow and choose the menu layer and then key in the rotation, and then when we reach the end of the animation, I will go ahead and rotate it by 180 degrees. That is 180 like this. Now if I go ahead and play the animation, you can see what happens. We start from this and then become an arrow. And you can see right now the animation looks a bit weird because the curve is applied to the path but not to the rotation. So I'll go ahead and select the keyframes, add a interpolation, and let's make it a bit customized like this. Now I can go ahead and play the animation, and you can see we have a completely different effect, that is this right here. So that's how you can create transitions between different states by editing the vertices of paths in Rive. In this lesson, we will learn how to set custom draw order rules on a shape or a group. Here I have two groups, that is an earth and a moon right here. And if I move it over the earth, you can see it is above the earth. And if I want it to be behind the earth, then I can take the layer in the hierarchy and put it below the earth layer like this. And now you can see it is behind our earth. Now let's say I want to animate the moon that is revolving around the earth. So it will be above the earth and then it will go behind the earth. Currently we cannot achieve the same, that is above and behind both at the same time. But we can do that using draw order rules. To create a new draw order rule, we can go ahead and select our layer, in this case the moon shape. And in the inspector, in the draw order panel, we can create a new rule like this. By default, we have the normal rule, which is using this layer's position in the hierarchy, which is above the earth. We can create another rule. Let's go ahead and name it something like below our earth. And then I can use this by clicking on this right here, radio button. And now we can edit its properties, that is the draw order should be below the target. And the target will be a shape layer. That is, you can apply draw order rules to a shape layer, to a group, or any other layer, but the target should not be a group. So I can go ahead and make it behind the earth by selecting the last shape inside of our earth group, that is the ocean right here. You can see the target is changed to the ocean, and now the moon is behind our earth. So I can go ahead and switch between the draw order rules, that is below or normal like this. I can create another rule that is above the earth, and if I go ahead and select the same, and you can see by default it is above because it is using the layer's position, but we can be specific and say that the target will be the top layer in the earth, in this case the shadow right here. And you can see we are above the earth. I can go ahead and switch between the draw order rules to create an effect like this. So that's how we set custom draw order rules in Rive. In the previous lesson, we learned how can we add custom draw order rules to a layer like this to change its order irrespective of its place in the hierarchy. In this lesson, we'll go ahead and create an animation where the moon revolves around the earth, and we'll also change the draw orders. So let's go to the animate mode. And first of all, let's animate the position of the moon. So at the very beginning, let's place the moon here, and then halfway through our animation, it will be somewhere here so that we go back and forth. And to do that, I will copy the first frame and paste it at the end. I will apply easing as well to the motion, and if I play through the animation, you can see we are animating or revolving behind the earth. So at this point, it should be above the earth, and then it should go behind the earth. To animate the draw order, we'll go ahead and first of all expand the moon and then go to the draw order. And if I select any option like this, you can see a keyframe is added for the draw rule of moon. And this keyframe is the normal. In this case, we can select above earth, which should be the case. And now if I play through the animation, you can see we are above earth. And notice the keyframe is a hold keyframe. That is, it's not going to interpolate between the draw rules. That is, of course, not possible between the above and below earth. Instead, we're just holding the current value, which is it should stay above the earth. And then right here, it should go below the earth. So I can go ahead and select this option, and you can see the keyframe is created. And if I go forward, you can see the moon is now behind the earth. So if I go ahead and play the animation as a whole, you can see we are animating above and behind the earth like this. To add another dimension to the animation, we can add some scale to the moon as well. That is, when it is above the earth, it will be a bit bigger, and when it is behind the earth, it will be a bit smaller. So let's go ahead and quickly animate the scale as well. I will key in the scale properties, move the timeline to a position where the moon is above the earth, and increase the scale by, let's say, 5%. And then I can come here, set the scale back to normal, in this case 30%. And when the moon is behind the earth, we will make it 5% less, that is 25, and back to 30 like this. Let's apply easing to these keyframes as well. And now our animation is ready. So that's how we animate the draw order of any layer like this to create an animation in Rive.